Hello, hello. Welcome, everyone. Seeing lots of people coming into the webinar. Give it just a little bit of time here to let everybody get in. As you're coming in, if you want to open up the chat, make sure you change the direction from to host and panelists to everyone. And then if you would, if you don't mind, go in and just let us know your name, your role, and then what university or college you're at. And that way everybody can see where everybody's coming from. And we'll get started here in just a moment. And Alex, oh yeah, okay, I was going to tell Alex a reminder to put it to everyone.
Yes, that reminder was for me. The last one of these I did, I thought I was chatting to all the attendees the entire time. No, I was not, so.
George Mason, Southwest Mississippi, Manhattan Community College. And I should let everyone know we are recording right now, and we'll be sending out a recording of the webinar. So if anything does happen and you have to step away, we completely understand how things like that happen. And so we will send out a recording here. I always like to give me a couple of days, at least by Friday, I'll have it sent out. All right, lots of people coming in. I kind of lost track of everyone where everybody was saying they're from. I see Meridian. I've seen was that Wilmington University? Awesome. Okay. Well, welcome everyone. We'll go ahead, keep getting those chats in there. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm David Green. I am an account executive with Harmonize. We are very happy to be hosting today's webinar. We've done a series of these subject-specific webinars looking at teaching different subjects online. And one we got very often was, how do we do engagement with math courses? and so we eventually found two amazing instructors and instructional designers who have just had some really great successes in their online math classes, and we wanted to bring them in and share some of that information. Before I introduce them, I will say we also have with us today Alex Penn. She is our instructional designer that's on staff here at Harmonize. And she'll be also monitoring the chat and Q&A as well as a Padlet. And you know what? Let me go ahead and get that Padlet out here. So we want this to be a little bit of a interactive type of setup. And so I want everyone to have access to this Padlet. You can go in. We want to share ideas. Both presenters will also be adding some things after the webinar to the Padlet to share some of the ideas that they're talking about during the presentation. And so to encourage you also to go into the Padlet and interact with each other, we're going to give away some Starbucks gift cards. Starbucks gift cards. I got tongue tied there. But so make sure you go in there and interact with each other and share ideas as we're going through the presentation. I would like to thank both of our presenters who joined us today. We have Stephanie Phillips. She is an instructor and the coordinator of basic and intermediate algebra at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. And we also have Bryan Fede. Did I say that right, Bryan? Bryan Fede, Ph.D. He's an instructional designer and in digital learning at George Mason University. And so we'll have both of them here today to kind of talk through some of the strategies and successes that they have had and show you kind of some examples. Of course, we're not going to share student data, but we've kind of recreated some of the things they've been doing, and we'll share that with you as well. I will point out we've got a lot of webinars that we host throughout the year. keep checking on our website. We do have one. I don't think it's posted yet. Coming up on November the 15th, that is being co-hosted with OLC. Marcus, our CEO, will be hosting that. But we have a slate of webinars coming up. That Alex will be hosting many of those on different subjects around AI, around. Alex, what are some of the ones that you're doing? I guess I'm trying to think right now. Of course, I'm drawing a blank. I know AI is a big one.
Yeah, we're going to talk about private assignments, which is a mode that Bryan's going to talk about a little today. So if you get interested in that, we're doing a whole thing on private assignments and AI coaching. We have some ones posted already on like private journaling and AI coaching and things like that. So
Awesome.
yeah, lots of good stuff.
Well, great. So we'll go ahead and get into the main part of this presentation, what everyone has come here for. I will say I've met with Stephanie and Bryan several times now, and it's been absolutely eye-opening. Some of the things that they talk about and hearing how they go about and why they go about doing what they're doing in their classes. I was a high school and college student that was really good at math, but I never particularly liked math as much. But I always seemed to do really well in it. And I never took an online math class, but in the in-person classes I took in college, uh, it always seemed like, as far as engagement in that class, um, you would have myself and maybe two or three other students that would speak up during class, talk about different things, talk through the issues they were having, and everyone else in the class would just sit there and not participate. And that was always a struggle because it seemed like, I was the only one, or it was one of just a few of us. But one of the things I hear, both from Bryan and Stephanie, is that that's actually easier to combat in the online courses because you have more participation. There's more inclusiveness into that, and kind of more equity that gets shared around to give more students voices. So with that in mind, Stephanie, maybe start us out. What have you been seeing, based on that? Like how are students able to have more of a voice in online math courses? I think you're on mute, Stephanie.
Thanks. So yeah, a lot of people are nervous about speaking out in class, right? And once that handful of students start rolling and they become the ones that are engaged, most of the others just take a back seat, right? They just let that handful of students basically run the discussion. What I've seen with the online discussions is that we have, it's a graded participation. Of course, that matters in terms of student engagement. But because there's a grade attached to the students participating in the discussion, then we get more engagement from students that possibly wouldn't have asked a question before, right? And it allows for students that are struggling to post those struggles. I mean, those are some of the tools that I use, is a way for students to post their questions and engage with the content with their classmates. And so I found that I get a lot higher percentage of the entire class participating this way than I even do in the on-campus classroom.
So you had told me, like, one of the things you're doing, you found Q&A boards don't really work because basically, if they're not given a grade, you already mentioned that, they don't want to participate. But you kind of have done that as a way in your class of saying, hey, we're going to have a Q&A board, but it's going to have points assigned to it, but it's not necessarily post one elaborate thesis statement or whatever, and then we're all going to comment. It's more like, ask for help, tell us what you've had successes on or where you're struggled with. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. So I mean, you think about the online class from the student's perspective and from the instructor's perspective. So from the instructor's perspective, sometimes online classes, we are more difficult to respond to students' questions than the on-campus ones, because when you're on campus and a student asks a question, the entire class benefits from the instructor's response. And so I know a lot of us probably experienced this during COVID, where we would get email after email after email of basically the same question, but a little bit of a variety, and then responding to all those individual emails. It takes a lot of time, right? So using these harmonized tools, we're basically funneling all the questions into one format where first of all, the students are asking and answering one another's questions. And then they also have the ability to flag me as the instructor and ask me a question as well. So the example you have here, David, let's see.
This was Nick's
Yeah, so the
question.
student, this was the first one the student asked. It was one of the more difficult questions in that assignment. And the student has flagged me as the instructor. So when they flag it as an instructor question, when I respond, then everyone in that group gets to see the response. So that's a major plus. I don't have to respond to 15 or 20 different emails basically asking the same question. And then let's see, I'm trying to see what else
Or
you
you
got
could
down
have a
here.
student like this that said, oh, okay, I don't know if the teacher will say something different here, but here's my thoughts about it. Right. So they're able to kind of come in and help assist before maybe you even get in there, or maybe even afterwards.
That's my goal, right? So in terms of percentage wise, I mean, I get less than 10% of the questions posted flagged to me, and that's good. That's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the students to post questions and for their classmates to respond with answers. And it's working really well. Like I said, I tried this more just organically, like, hey, here's a discussion board, here's a Q&A, and if you have a question, put it there. And the whole semester, maybe 3 students asked a question because there was no grade attached to it, and it just didn't work. So I had to create a grading rubric that required students to post and respond, and it's working a lot better that way.
So, Bryan, you're an instructional designer. Like, what? One of the things that I was talking with Alex about and setting all this up, I was like, we always talk about discussions and discussions being the key word there, but really, when we're talking about RSI and different things like that, there are requirements of online learning. It's engagement. It's not necessarily discussions, and we can call them discussions, but it's really more engagement, right? And that's what the key is. Can you speak more to that, of how key engagement is to math courses?
Sure. It's sort of first piggybacking off of sort of that earlier discussion about sort of slowing down the conversation a little bit to allow people with other, ways of expressing themselves. They may be able to draw pictures. They may be able to, oftentimes you hear from the students who don't talk up a lot in class, and those students often have a really interesting way to approach a problem that doesn't always get, sort of heard in the classroom. So that's one of the things that I really like about that. I also have found that there's sort of an equity feature here with English language learners as well. You often won't hear from English language learners in a live class because they just don't maybe have the confidence in the English to be able to participate. They might have very valuable insights in terms of the mathematics, but oftentimes keep those to themselves. In this modality, you can slow down a little bit. But the engagement is sort of the important part here, and engagement comes in all sorts of flavors, right? One of the things that's really interesting in the literature is what they call lurkers, right? Like, so oftentimes these are, even if you have a student who's not saying a lot in a thread, they may be reading a lot in a thread. That's one of the things that not lots of analytics capture, but it's a real benefit. It makes this it makes the mathematics kind of semi-permanent in a way. You're not just listening to a student talk about something in a class. All of a sudden you have these artifacts that you can deal with too, and students can go back to. All dependent on the right question, right? And this is always the question I get is I can't get my students to engage with each other, right? Like, and my answer is always kind of like, well, let me see what you're asking for a question first, right? So I am an instructional designer now, but I was a math teacher educator. My Ph.D.'s in math education, and really, looked at what those successful aspects are of really good discussion questions. And they ask a question that students can engage back and forth on. It's not a question that maybe you do and has an answer. It's something that's got a little bit of debate to it, right? Or something that we know might evoke some sort of a misconception among students. And, we're not trying to trap them so that we can say, ah, you're wrong. We're trying to trap them so another person might go, hey, yeah, did you know that you didn't distribute all the way through there, or something like that, right? So looking for those very provocative questions. And in math, they're really all over the place, right? I think most mathematics, especially sort of at the college level, the high school and college level, can be done many, many, many different ways. And there are many paths through the problem the same way. And it's really pretty neat to watch those sort of unfold in these asynchronous discussions, and watch people try to make connections between those.
You
And you
have a specific math example here that can kind of put what Brian's saying into something tangible. So say, for example, you're in a unit on systems of equations, and you've already covered graphing, elimination, and the addition method, or I mean substitution and addition. So you covered the three methods, right? So then you could ask sort of a question of basically an opinion type question that would say something to the effect of, in given a circumstance, which method would you use and why? Right. So you set up maybe just something simple like a two system equations with two variables. Which approach would you take and why? Right. So, and there's all kinds of ways you can do that. And it doesn't have to be, in fact, I found it better with these discussions for them to be low stakes graded assignments, because the students don't feel the pressure to actually get it correct. They have a little bit of freedom to try, you know what I'm trying to say, without it feeling like a test. And they, especially if you ask more, like I say, kind of opinion-based questions, it's a little bit of it's a personal preference, because we know you could use substitution or elimination, and in some of those situations you wouldn't want to graph if you're going to deal with rational number, you know what I'm saying? So there's questions like that. You just have to kind of think about where you are in your unit and what would engage the students in that way.
And I think that's a phenomenal example, because there are so many different ways to solve a two equation with two variable problem. Maybe I might even start the unit there, ask them a question, a word problem that, asks them to come up with a solution that is essentially two variables, two equations, two variables, and watch how the different minds in the classroom, usually put into groups of 5 to 7, something like that, to make it sort of manageable and make the ideas fresh. But see what comes up from students, right? Because it may turn out you don't really even have to teach any of those methods, right? Students might really start to make those connections on their own. Now, you're probably going to mention it in class, yeah, but if a student, one student's mind goes right to graphing and they graph it out, and then they see that somebody else did it by substitution, and they can make that connection between those two models. That's really what I think is important in the mathematics, not necessarily that they, got an answer to a, what might be kind of a cheap question on two equations with two variables, but do they make something this general? Yeah.
Yeah, Brian, say something similar could be something like quadratic equations, right? So there's a lot of examples out there, right? So in this example of this quadratic equation, are you going to factor, complete the square, quadratic formula, right? So they're just engaging the students with if you're given this type of basic problem, how are you going to approach it? There's more than one way to approach it, and for them to learn from each other. I think what you've got up there, David, is some error correction too, as well, and that's also a valuable tool for students to help correct one another's errors.
And Bryan was talking about earlier different modalities as well. And one of the things you said, Stephanie, is you asked the students to post, and this is what I was showing right now, is just different images of what they're working on, but then also include an audio recording as they talk through the actual equations or the problems that they're working on. Why do you do that, and what benefits do you see from having them kind of complete that type of assignment?
Right. So I started out not using the audio component and realized very quickly that it was very easy for students to grab content off the internet and post it as a text version, right? So I was looking for a little bit of authenticity, well, not a little bit, a lot, verification of authenticity, right? That the student had some level of understanding of what they were posting in their discussion, and not that they had just found something and thought, oh, that sounds good. Because I did have one student in an algebra class post in a response to a prompt about the power rule, the calculus power rule. They had no idea what they were even talking about. They were way off. So with using the audio components, though, we know as instructors that if you can explain something, you really understand it, right? That's the next level of understanding the idea. So having them just take the moment to vocalize either their question or a brief explanation of what they've posted, it just solidifies their learning. It helps them learn it better, and it stick with them better, and helps me validate to a certain degree that they actually are the author of the content or have some level of understanding there.
And it doesn't have to
David,
be audio. That's one of the ways that you encourage it, but they could do screen record, or they could even video themselves if they wanted to. So there's several different options for them to kind of go in and have that explanation.
David, would this be a good time to talk about sort of the oral quiz? I feel like it piggybacks on some of those things nicely. I had
Yes.
a faculty member that I was working with that decided to institute in a rather large class, quite frankly. So I was very appreciative of the fact that she was going out on a limb to sort of try this. But instituted oral quizzes, and we didn't really do anything wild to set them up. These don't have to be quite as rich as a discussion question because they're really just showing students' understanding of the topic, right? But to Stephanie's point, sometimes you get a problem, and it's a relatively simple problem at whatever level you're teaching at, right? And so you expect students to be able to do it, but they can also find those things. And with AI getting better and better and better, I mean, we're now talking about AI that really kind of does math pretty well. But as the teacher in me, the elementary middle grades math teacher in me, I used to teach high school, but I love working with sort of the little kids and listening to their thought process. I know that they're sometimes they can do things procedurally, or they can go out and copy off their friends or whatever. But then when you ask them to actually present it, and David's right, I think we had students doing that all sorts of ways, where they'd have sort of the whiteboard in the background, or they'd have a document cam, or they would just take a screen grab of the picture and they would sort of talk their way through it. But I think you get a much better sense listening to a student try to explain their way through math they've already done than sometimes just getting the math handed in. This was really kind of nice. I don't think without Harmonize, I'm not sure I could have pulled it off, but this ability to have a conversation and set it so that it's only between the student and the instructor is really pretty nice feature here that allowed us to do these things. And like I said, we didn't do anything heroic in order to ask. We just found questions from the textbook, maybe gave a choice of 3 or 4 questions that they might address that expresses the math that we wanted to get out of them. Even if it's just in a procedural sense, we'll save the rich discussions for the discussions with multiple people in there. But it was incredibly valuable, I think, both to the instructor and ultimately to the student.
And one other thing you mentioned, and this is really more focused of teaching math online, but you mentioned being able to use an equation editor within the system, and Harmonize does allow that. But can you speak more to just why, beyond just using it in Harmonize, but why is that so important, no matter what the tool is, to have an equation editor?
Well, I mean, the equation editor, it might be some students are very adept at the equation editor and can really work with the equation editor nicely. One of the things that this equation editor does is it translates into LaTeX. David, you could tell me, can you put the LaTeX code in there specifically and have it render, or do you have to go through the? I mean, that's a more technical question. I don't know, but
Alex
it's
might be
very
able to
nice.
answer that one.
Yeah, it's very nice to be able to at least put this in LaTeX, both as a professor who needs to comply with accessibility requirements, but also, you know, when students are sharing, if, you know, they're sharing pictures and there is an accessibility issue in the class, then there are problems there too. So it's an accessibility feature that I really appreciate. And it works pretty well for the most part.
Stephanie, you mentioned also AI. You but actually both of you have brought up kind of that AI feature of, you know, you've got to be aware that what other challenges or what other solutions would you give out to instructors that are teaching online of how to confront, good or bad, you know, using AI in the classroom? Are you doing anything to encourage using AI for certain tasks or anything like that?
Well, I will say that, like most of us, I'm still learning that, right? I'm still trying to figure out it's the role of AI. I will say with the introductory level algebra classes, it's so key that the students can think for themselves, that we presently are discouraging the use of it simply because it's too easy for them to just find a correct answer
Right.
and not really know what they're doing. So this is one of the reasons, like David was saying, with the student being able to articulate and explain their process, that's very helpful. But one of the things that I was finding with scripted discussions, so like, say for example, even with application problems, which I thought I had created pretty clever application problems, but apparently not clever enough. But you know, with I had created a scripted topic that I wanted the students to discuss, and it was not really going as well as I had hoped, because I really felt it sounded too robotic. Like the responses from the students were not what they were reflecting on their on campus on their tests, and not what my on campus students were reflecting in their own understanding of the you know what I'm trying to say. It was, I could just tell that it was not student generated, and you guys know what I'm talking about, who have dealt with this before. So that's one of the reasons presently I moved away from prescribing the topics for discussion and switched over to the graded Q&A, because as the students are working in the Q&A, they're posting genuine questions that they have. I mean, these are real questions the students have about the content, and their classmates, you can tell by the responses, are posting genuine responses, and some of them are not accurate responses in terms of how to, you know, they answer with a way that's not accurate, and then another classmate will come behind and say, well, actually it's supposed to be. And that's the point, right? That's the point. The point of the online discussion, in my opinion, where what I'm trying to create is just a community of learners, right? People that can comfortably talk about the math together, that feel comfortable asking questions, are comfortable posting incorrect responses, and are okay with that dialogue. That's really my ultimate chief goal here, is to create a dialogue and a community for these students. And so, but I've been surprised, to be honest with you, the how often students will respond correctly to a classmate's question, and how little time I have to spend correcting, or how little I actually get flagged. They usually do a pretty good job. But of course, again, one of the graded requirements is that they respond, right? So I mean, that's part of the rubric. They have to respond. So it's working better. I'll say it that way. It's overcoming AI in the sense that it's more real. It's and authentic. The engagement is versus when I was just creating the prescribed discuss this topic sort of thing.
Another thing real quick, Stephanie, that I thought you mentioned, I don't actually have it pulled up. I don't know if we did one of these or not in our examples, but you mentioned to me about students who are not having any issues. They're not having any problems. You're saying, okay, it's either post an issue you're having or give us an aha moment. Post about things that you have been enlightened about in going through the course. Talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah, thanks for reminding me. So when I first started the attempt at the Q&A discussion, I was first forcing everyone to post 2 questions. And then I got some feedback at the end of the semester from some of my students that were excelling that said that they felt like they were just sort of making up questions some weeks, that they didn't really have questions. And so that made me stop and rethink about how that I was going to redesign this. And so what I decided to do for the 2 posts that the students are required to make is that they have to either post a question or post what I call a light bulb aha moment, where the students that are more advanced in the course can say, hey, look, I've just learned something new. I'm going to use this discussion board, check that box of having to post here and post something that I've learned. And I've gotten, you can see, when the student comments come in, that the students are really appreciate that, because one of their classmates obviously is studying the same topic as them and has conquered it, right? And isn't explaining it in a way differently than I did. And it's okay, it's better, right? Because they have an alternate way of hearing an explanation, and the students really appreciate their classmates sharing their aha moments. So that's been successful.
And you you also said you first started with doing this weekly, but then you went for a 2-week period. And why was it that you switched for that as well?
Well, there's a variety of reasons, but it was getting crowded with the testing and all the other assignments. And so instead of requiring it to be done, I was doing this where every Wednesday and like they had to have something posted by Wednesday and comments made by Saturday. It became too crowded. It was overkill. And so I changed it to where there's a 2-week period of time where the students have to comment. And then I set up the milestones. I don't know if you want to talk about that, but there's a milestone where all the posts have to be in. So there's a deadline for the post. And then there's a few days after that first milestone where people comment on the post. And that's working well. It syncs really well with Canvas. I've appreciated that.
That's awesome. Yeah. Bryan, I have this pulled up here. One of the things you were talking about is actually the ability to annotate and bring in to where the students can interact, or even the instructors can interact on top of coursework or just the work that the students are submitting. Like here, a student showed their work. Can you talk a little bit about annotations and how that can really help in online math courses?
Yeah, I mean, I think of it, and we talked a little bit about the idea of error analysis, right? So really, if I was teaching a course in math ed, one of the things that to prospective teachers, one of the things I would often do is give, not convoluted, but just partially correct answers, right, that are out there that have really good math in them, but might either be way too complicated and there's a simpler way to do it, or you're trying to really think through the students' ideas and think about what it is that they're saying. I find those are really rich in terms of discussions. And when I think the student is saying this, and maybe it's a misconception that they have about this, and that, it gets the teachers really thinking about like where those errors are. But I mean, I think it's probably good practice for just about anybody. You give them an error and you try to get people to figure out, where the math is wrong. Of course, for teachers, I think it's even better because you can extend that discussion and say, all right, now you know what this student has done incorrectly. How do you move them forward in mathematical trajectories? But yeah, I think there's a lot of potential for this, because in the past it's been really difficult to be like, okay, in line 2 of the students, you got to explain the visual at the same time that they're trying to explain the mathematics, and the cognitive load gets all sort of messed up, and next thing you know, the whole thread is kind of a mishmash of things. With the annotator, it's nice, you can sort of drop those pins and annotate next to the pins, and discuss in ways that we haven't been able to before, right?
Right. And you can also get great, like whether that's the students annotating on each other's work, or you as the, like you just said, trying to explain online, okay, on this part of this entire worksheet that you did, you got it wrong. Well, they might think you're talking about another part of that equation, and then they get more confused. You can actually pinpoint that with the annotations. Alex,
Yeah, and I think what you're saying there, David, is like, there are a bunch of different assignments there, right? One of them is a peer review assignment, right? And that's a valuable thing that we don't probably do enough in mathematics. We rely on, teachers or, our TAs to do the grading, those sorts of things, and students are getting feedback from us, but they're not necessarily getting feedback. You're going to get a better product if it goes through sort of a peer review. The other one is a well thought out activity that you have found this provocative sort of answer for, that there can be some discussion around. So 2 very different things that you can do with the same tool there.
And Alex, did you have a question for us?
It got answered, although we've had a couple other ones come up. This is maybe to Bryan and Stephanie and to anyone in the chat. It came up in the Padlet, but we have someone looking for math, data, science conferences that focus on higher ed, especially if they focus on like online teaching. Like, it seems like people are enjoying this and like want more spaces to talk about online teaching of mathematics, particularly in
I've
higher
been kind
ed.
of looking for one of those for a long time. I'm Stephanie, you might know better. I know the teacher ones, like Association of Mathematics Teacher Educators and NCTM and things like that. Some of the NCTM stuff, probably applies. I have found personally that there is a lot of K-12 literature out there that's very well researched and generalizable, very generalizable to college content. So I wouldn't be afraid of hopping in some of those. Also, you know your content well enough to sort of think through, okay, what are they thinking? What are they trying to elicit from students? We're trying to elicit the same thing from students. The college level, the math might be more complicated, but I'm not sure that the theoretical bent is a whole lot different. Stephanie, do you know any math conferences? Any,
Well, I'm going to be completely honest with you. UAB has an outstanding e-learning department, and I would say most of my training has just come from internal conferences and webinars that our e-learning department has put together. I mean, they have sessions every year on technology. That's how I learned about Harmonize. They had basically just all the vendors of all of the approved technology do like exactly what we're doing right here, a little product demonstration and things. So I actually don't know. I wish I had more information to give you, but our university has just been really supportive for online learning. I have all the tools I need there.
PMENA is one that I've done in the past, the Psychology of Mathematics Education. They have, it's probably slanted a little bit towards K-12, but they definitely, have some stats people there and some higher ed people.
Stephanie, this is a question more for you, with you being in the classroom. What are some of the areas that you're seeing the most success with as far as having like more private assignments? This is outside maybe what you're doing in Harmonize, but is there anything that you're seeing in online learning that for math that you're finding success with outside of just the discussions and engagements?
That's a good question. So, I mean, the students, I feel, really do learn well from each other in a way that I think we underestimate, right? So we are obviously the experts in the room, and we are in our positions for a reason. But I think we sometimes undervalue what peer review and even giving 10 or 15, 20 minutes for group work in the classroom can do in terms of enhancing learning. I think it's a struggle for me, to be honest with you, because I have so much to tell them, right? So when they're in front of me, I feel like I have a dump truck that I'm about to back up and just dump in their laps. Like there's so much information I have to tell them, and they're in my classroom for a reason, and I'm the expert, and I need to just load it up, right? So I think it's a struggle sometimes to not be the only voice, right? And to allow some time for group work and discussion. I'm still figuring that out, to be perfectly honest with you. I'm still trying to figure out how to balance that, where the students get the instruction they need. I mean, I've tried the most successful approach to trying to allowing for that is a flipped classroom, which basically came from my experience doing online instruction, where the videos were posted online, and those were the places where the students were received primary instruction. The students like it because they can pause, they can fast forward, they can rewind, things like that. So the students like it. And it allowed classroom time to be freed up a little bit more for some more group work type activities, because I wasn't pressed for, I've got to cover this, or they'll never have, they won't know how to do this because I won't be able to teach it. But having those videos posted worked if in that model. Like, again, they call it the flipped classroom, but I'm still navigating that, to be honest with you. I'm still trying to figure out a good balance.
But you are actually
Yeah.
using Harmonize for some of your group assignments too, didn't you mention that as well? The group settings in
Right.
Harmonize.
So one of it's again a very low stakes assignment, but yes, where the students are just engaging with a topic, right? Or they are error correcting. So yeah, it can be used both, and it can be used for on campus classes as well as online. It can be used for both. Sure, yeah, I've done it with both.
I was just going to say something similar. I really think this is a nice tool to extend the classroom's discussion, right? So something comes up in class, and we've all had that, or we're halfway through a math problem, right? Well, we can take that halfway through the math problem, and, students should be expected to do things in between the time that they show up and the next time that they show up. And this is sort of a nice tool to sort of extend that into the into the asynchronous time when students are thinking. So
I will say one of the ideas I have that I haven't fleshed out yet that I want to try at some point is using Harmonize as a place to post the lecture notes from that day, and then requiring the students between classes to comment on the lecture notes or post questions. And then between that class and the next class, I can have some feedback from what we did and address those questions the next class. That's something that I've thought about, a way that I've thought about using Harmonize. I haven't done it yet, but that's my next idea. That's the next thing I'm going to try.
the challenge
Awesome.
there is some of the accessibility, but yeah, I've had some success actually using. You were asking about uses for AI. As an instructor, one of the uses that one of the things I've used AI for is to take handwritten notes, just scan them, and the AI can translate that into LaTeX code, which makes it accessible for students. At that point, it becomes an activity that allows you to do something like that, Stephanie, I think.
Kind of going on that same note, Brian, have you had any ideas that maybe you've not fleshed out yet and actually implemented, but maybe you've worked with some instructors and you're thinking, hey, this might be some things I want to try out in the future?
I think a lot of the things that I used in across other disciplines are fair game now. I think there are opportunities for role play. There's opportunities for all of these complex assignments, activities that I've always wanted to do that we either I don't have the creativity to be able to set up on my own, or I don't know the rich context, or it becomes a cheap story because I just, it's not totally real life. So I think some of those things like a little bit of a role play would be a really fun thing to sort of think about, operationalize. And I think because of the different modalities, the different media that you can bring into Harmonize, that allows for some creative thought about, like, what it is that we're giving students, the authenticity of the task that we're giving students to do. So I don't, I really liked the, working with the professor who used the oral quizzes, because, right there, I think I got them thinking more about how students think and listening to students, than maybe they normally did. So that was one big step for me. But then, really using this to pull off some of those more creative activities, I think, is something that I've got some interest in doing.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We got just a little bit of time left. I wanted to open up. Did we miss any questions, Alex, or was there anything you maybe wanted to bring up from the comments in the chat or in the Padlet?
We've had so much awesome engagement actually in the Padlet and in the chat. One thing that just came up, Nicole mentioned a resource she likes, Novak Education, and she mentioned that it is K-12 focused, but then said there's like more overlap maybe between K-12 and higher ed than teachers sometimes think. And I know that was something Brian had actually expressed the other day. So I don't know if you want to talk about that at all, Brian. It seemed like a lead-in for you.
Yeah, I sort of alluded to it earlier, but I mean, mathematics theory is sort of mathematics theory, and good practice in teaching mathematics. Most of the research has been done at the K-12 level, but there is, really nothing. Sometimes, when I'm speaking with higher ed people, I have to kind of hide that somehow. But I'm really doing, really giving the same advice out. I look at, some of the stuff that came out in the early 2000s on task design and cognitive demand, and how to keep cognitive demand in your class, and what are, the aspects of a high demand task. They have to have various entry points, right? So, students might approach it at, from the graph side or drawing a picture side, if they're less sophisticated in their understanding. But they might also be able to give some words to it, or they might be able to connect those two things. So, they often have multiple solution paths in addition to multiple entry points. They, really probably do need to evoke some anxiety in the student, right? If it's an easy question, there's nothing to really think about or talk about. So these are elements that we talk about, when we create K-5 tasks, but they're the same elements that need to be there when you're talking about, any higher ed task.
And
Stephanie, I don't know if you thoughts on this too. I pitched that right to Brian, but I don't know if you have resources as well, like if you use any K through 12 resources. And sorry, I stepped on you there, David.
You're good.
I only spent 3 years. I've been out of K-12 since, I think the last time I was in K-12 was 2005. So I've been out for a while. So I can't speak to that, but I will say that a good teacher is a good teacher, right? I mean, so as someone that takes their job seriously in terms of making their content accessible to their students, being available to their students, caring about the student's success. I mean, I think that translates to all levels, to be honest with you.
There is a really good book that I would recommend if you're interested in these discussions, and it was done in K-12 environments, and it was done in face-to-face environments, but I often pull from this too. It's by Suzanne Chapin and Catherine O'Connor, and it's about I can't remember what the exact title is, Math Talk or something like that. But what they have are these what they call talk moves that can help you facilitate a mathematical discussion. So like wait time, some I'm in the midst of thinking through that myself and wondering, can I translate those talk moves into asynchronous spaces? I think we can. And I think we've talked about some of that already. One of the things that we use in the classroom is wait time. Well, this is a perfect environment to use wait time. We want to be careful as instructors not to jump in too early, but also not to, let misconceptions continue to pile on top of each other. So we're just, we can use wait time there. We can ask students to revoice. Hey, can you say what what I think I hear you saying is this? Can you rephrase what Roger said? These are all things that we can use in the classroom. Let's face it. I mean, discussions in the classroom aren't easy to manage, right? So that's again, that's probably a case. It's probably case 6. But a lot of research behind that. But I think it's generalizable and helpful for us to look at in higher ed.
I'm going to put Alex on the spot here. We're getting right near the end of the hour, but one thing we talked about the other day, Alex, and this was outside of the math discussion, but it kind of came up today, is modality and how important different modalities of learning and offering that to students. Can you speak on that just a little bit? And Stephanie and Bryan, if you want to jump in on that as well, please, by all means. But I know we had this conversation. I really liked some of the thoughts you had about that.
Yeah, I mean, so like we all kind of know, like to some degree, the whole like people have different learning styles thing has been debunked, but like that doesn't mean it's not good to offer students different ways to express their understanding. I'm a big fan of universal design for learning, and a big part of it is like allowing for multiple means of like expression and submission. And so like I love this idea of giving the students options to post audio or post a screen share, or some students for accessibility aren't going to be able to do any of those things, but like it's great that Harmonize has an accessible LaTeX editor that's going to render the equations with alt text. So I think that's great. On the topic, so like it sounds like in some ways it's cool, like Stephanie kind of requires this multimodal thing, and you could imagine just like having your students could just say like it needs to be multimodal, it needs to be text plus something else, and like leaving it a little uncertain. One of the comments in the Padlet, someone said they actually give extra credit. This is like a bit of a dirty word in Harmonize because we don't play well with extra credit, but you could always put your extra credit somewhere else. They actually give extra credit to students who post like images and something else, but like they kind of give their students extra credit for going beyond and using these different modalities, which I think is cool because a lot of times what we see is students just defaulting to text, even when we're like, oh, there are so many cool tools here, they just default to the text. So I think they're like, it's one of those things where it's like, yes, requiring them to post video or do an oral quiz combats AI, like Stephanie and Bryan have both touched on that. But like, yes, having them actually talk through their thoughts and essentially teach each other, we also know is like a great practice for solidifying understanding. And offering students these options is really great for their learning. So
and drawing diagrams and pictures is really just part of the mathematical discussion too. It may be
yes,
what we think of as sort of not quite as sophisticated as an algorithm, but again, it's a valid way of solving a problem. And if that's the way if that's your entry into the problem, that's great. The fact that this tool allows students to express themselves that way in a group of 7 or 8, maybe one person's looking at that picture, and even if none of them understand how to do it algorithmically, maybe somebody can build on that image, that picture that one person's drawn, that accurate mathematical picture, to start to put some of the mathematics sort of behind there. And next thing you know, instead of you telling them the algorithm, they built the algorithm themselves, and they're going to have a deeper understanding of that.
I will piggyback on that a little bit, and this is one of my favorite reasons to use the Q&A style is to just see where the students are going to go with it. And so, like David, you had, if you still have those images where people are screen sharing and handwriting, I think that would help people to see a little bit more like what we're talking about. But the different modes that the students can use, some people, most of our entry-level math classes have some type of computer element to it, right? We know the major textbook publishers out there, right? I won't name their names, but you know who they are, and you know how your students are submitting a lot of their entry-level undergraduate assignments into these platforms, right? And so, but a lot of times students don't love that, right? It's efficient for grading, but they like to handwrite instead of click, click, click things. And so that's one of the ways that they can use Harmonize is they can take a photograph of their handwritten work, and then underneath it, they can create an audio file of it. Or if they have a specific question from within that assignment, so it may be a different post out there, David, but if they have a specific let me see if I can find like
Was it
maybe that
this
one? Yeah, the Nick, yeah. These are all fake students, so I'm trying to figure out like where these were going. But
Yeah, this is pages 348. Yeah, so this looks like it's from a textbook.
yeah, that's not a screenshot of the homework. But anyway, so sometimes the students, so there's a lot of the times in the Q&A, what the student will do is they will use the tool in Harmonize that says record screen. And so as soon as they hit record screen, it creates a screen capture of what they're on, and then they can voice over that, and they don't have to create a separate audio file. They can voice over their screen, and at least half of my students submit their posts that way. They really like the screen capture tool because they don't have to show their face, right? They get to be hidden, but at the same time, they don't have to attempt to rewrite everything, because some people are lazy in their handwriting or mathematics. They're the opposite of our handwriting people, right? They don't want to have to rewrite everything. They can go straight to the screen and say, use their cursor and say, what's going on in this particular place? Like, I didn't understand this explanation between here and here. Can someone help me understand the steps between these, this step and this step? There was a gap in the explanation. Can anyone out there help me? And then their classmates can chime in with like either an image and an audio, or another screenshot with a whiteboard annotation, or a handwritten post. I mean, there's a lot of different ways their classmates can respond and get, the students, I think, are doing really well with this interaction. The one posting the question is appreciative. The one responding with the answer is deepening their own understanding. It's working really well.
That's awesome. We are now, I think, a minute, maybe 2 minutes away. I do want to take a little bit of time to thank Bryan and Stephanie so much. You guys have been amazing from the first time we had a conversation to all the conversations we've had today. I'm sure everyone is leaving here with at least a idea, if nothing, if not many ideas to take back into their classrooms. So thank you both so much. And thank you, Alex, for joining us today. I'll be sending out the recording, like I said, by Friday. We try not to make this webinar be salesy, but I do want to say I did see some people say, I don't know if I can do this in my LMS without Harmonize, basically. So I did want to say, if you are interested in getting more information on Harmonize, please reach out to us. We do offer a free full semester pilot program that you can try it out. We do have to work with your LMS administrator and your team there at your university or college to get it implemented, but reach out to us. We can talk through those details and be glad to help you out. So thank everyone so much, and have a great rest of your day. And for anybody who's down in Florida, I did see a couple Polk State people. Please be safe with the hurricane, and I hope everything goes good there. Thank you guys so much.